Hello, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Ania. We both textile conservators from Zenzie Tinker Conservation in Brighton.
We're going to talk today about the Stephen Jones hats exhibition, which was on display at Brighton Pavilion in 2019. Zenzie Tinker Conservation is one of the largest textile conservation studios in the UK. Clients include local, national and international organisations such as the V&A, National Trust and smaller collectors of costume and heirlooms. The business was set up by Zenzie in 2003 and has since grown into a large team of conservators specialising in a diverse range of textile and paper treatments and display solutions. As a result, we're often brought in to work on complex textile conundrums, challenging our range of expertise. Zenzie Tinker Conservation is based in New England House, a large building owned by Brighton and Hove Council that has become home to a variety of businesses and organisations. It's become a real creative hub, and we were lucky enough to explore and utilise this throughout the Stephen Jones hats exhibition, and there'll be more on this to follow. The exhibition of hats by the British milliner Stephen Jones was on display at Brighton Pavilion from February to June 2019. The Royal Pavilion in Brighton is a rather extraordinary historic palace, a celebration of styles from across the globe. It was described as the Prince Regent's pleasure palace. George IV employed the theatre designer John Nash to transform the grounds in the early 19th century, while designers Frederick Crace and Robert Jones were brought in to develop the interior in a style that later became known as Chinoserie. Since graduating from Central St Martin's in the 1970s, Stephen Jones's incredible creations have been sported by everyone who's anyone, from Lady Gaga to members of the royal family. From Westwood to Dior, the Louvre to the Met, Jones has collaborated and been featured the world over. Stephen Jones said in an interview, "I grew up in a seaside town, but Brighton to me seemed exciting, exotic, and it symbolised art and freedom. In 2012, I designed a collection called Chinoserie on Sea, for which I researched Brighton, and in particular, the pavilion, extensively. And it feels like showing my hats there are almost like a homecoming. I've never had the opportunity to display hats in the environment which inspired them." The Brighton Museum curator Martin Pell and the milliner Stephen Jones have been in discussion about the pavilion exhibition concept many years prior to its realisation. The exhibition was initially conceived as a small spatial intervention consisting of a mere 15 celebrity hats situated around the banqueting hall dining table, suggesting a sort of fantasy dinner party. This was a far cry from the over 160 hats which finally went on to open display and 9 full costumes, scattered, draped and suspended from every corner of the space. As the deadline grew closer, the exhibition expanded and a multidisciplinary team was swiftly enlisted to assist. Martin Pell asked the ZTC team to assess and mount the hats for exhibition towards the end of 2018. Due to uncertainty around the exhibition funding, the process was not able to start until just before Christmas, and this was a mere 7 weeks before the exhibition was due to open. The hats were all assessed on site at the museum. Hats of all shapes and sizes arrived from the designer's archive store, piled into cardboard boxes. It was all a bit overwhelming at first sight, but as conservators we took a systematic approach to a slightly chaotic situation, dividing the hats into groups based on their specific mounting requirements. The hats were then delivered en masse to the ZTC studio. It's at this point that I think it's important to mention that these hats had, in the main, come on loan from the Stephen Jones archive and were not museum objects. They could therefore all come to the studio for mounting straight away with the designer's consent. An exciting project lay ahead of us, but not without its challenges. Time was short and, as with many local authority museums, the budgets was tight. We were told that we had £12,000 for our part of the work and that this figure had to cover our hours and materials. To put this in context, this only allowed about an hour and a half per hat. The exhibition comprised of over 160 hats, and hats were being added to the list up until the hour before the opening. These were made of everything and anything: paper napkins, a colander, a Barbie doll, and a pile of records, all featured within the range of materials Jones used. And they came in all shapes and sizes. Many of them had been created for catwalk, for showy effect rather than to withstand the tests of time, and they were not well secured, substantially made, or evenly weighted. Working with Stephen himself was also not without its challenges. While he was not on site every day, he was understandably very specific about the angle that each hat should be set at on its mount, to relate to the angle that it was designed to sit at on the head. Due to his particularly hectic work schedule, he had very limited time to assist, so we were given record shots of each object, carefully positioned on a mannequin to work from. These shots gave us the angle that he had originally positioned the hat at on the head, for us to then replicate when constructing the hat mounts. We also built up a file of our own reference images, celebrity and catwalk shots, to use alongside the reference images taken by Brighton Museum and to help us understand how each hat should look on the head. These were particularly helpful for providing additional visual reference material. Both Martin Pell, the curator, and Stephen, the designer, wanted all the mounts to be invisible, meaning that they had to sit inside the hat and go unnoticed by the visitors. Yet these were not hats as we know them. They ranged from a giant red swan to a delicate feather-adorned Alice band. We set about dividing the hats into groups as best we could and came up with 4 main types of mount. These were polystyrene, Foss shape, acid-free card, and stainless steel wire. The hats themselves dictated the type of mount. For example, if the crown of the head sat inside the hat, it was mounted onto a polystyrene head. Yet, if it covered more of the head, meaning that it would be visible inside, such as a turban, we used Foss shape. Hats based on an Alice band went on stainless steel wire, while the smaller, fascinator types went on acid-free card. At this point, I think it's important to say that when we're talking about the mount, we're only talking about the portion of the support that is in contact with the hat. We will discuss the stands separately, as these were made by Mike Penwolf from Panatechnia. One such solution we devised for the exhibition was the use of polystyrene heads. These were cheap, came in 2 sizes, and provided the round shape needed to fill the crown of the hat without too much building up or carving. While we do not advocate using polystyrene for long-term display, the tight deadline and limited budget, in combination with the short length of the exhibition run, meant that we had to be creative with our materials and find quick-fix solutions. Each polystyrene head had a central hole drilled through prior to use, and this would give us our vertical line when the polystyrene was threaded onto the steel rod to fit into the stand. The hat could then be set on the polystyrene head at the required angle, drawn round, and the polystyrene cut away as necessary. The underside of the mount was covered with a disc of card, a thin layer of polyester wadding, and a top cover of black jersey secured with a drawstring to give a smooth finish which would not catch the eye. Essentially, these 2 layers also isolated the non-conservation polystyrene from direct contact with the hats, and the open display scenario meant that any off-gassing was less problematic. Here are a few examples of hats with polystyrene mounts. Some had to be fully covered with black fabric as the hat was semi-transparent, while others just needed a covered base. Some mounts required additional carving and padding, while others could be cut from the polystyrene head offcuts. Mounts for hats with more elaborate crown shapes were made out of Foss shape. This is easy to shape, stitch, and cut, and can now be purchased in black as well as white in a range of thicknesses from Preservation Equipment, which meant that we did not need to cover it. Invisible supports were made by stitching the Foss shape into a cap on the sewing machine and casting the Foss shape over a head form. heat setting it with a steam iron and then cutting away the excess, leaving a support to fit neatly inside the hat. This was particularly useful for the turbans, which required a solid insert to prevent the turban from collapsing in, but needed to remain inconspicuous. Here we have another example of fosse shape used to support Kylie's Sydney Mardi Gras headdress. The third group were mounts made of acid-free card, for the small hats, like this example from Chinoserie on Sea. Circles of acid-free card were covered with poly wadding and black jersey.
All three of these mounts type had a metal washer with bolt, powder-coated black, to slot into the stand. We collaborated with the metalwork specialist Mike Penwolf on the fittings. The angle of the hat on the mount was recorded, as well as the height from the base of the mount to its crown. This was noted into the printed reference images. The information was then transferred to Mike, who set the washer onto the metal upright at the required angle for the mount to sit on. The height of the mount from the base to the crown indicated where the top of the stand had to be threaded, sandwiching the polystyrene mount between the angled washer at the base and a small bolt at the crown, therefore locking it into position. Mike is also based in New England House, which made the process of coordinating mount with the stand infinitely easier. The mount plus washer was then secured into each hat with fine pins and/or minimal stitching when necessary. The fourth group of hats consisted of Alice bands, crowns, and hats made from see-through materials. Mounts for these hats were made from stainless steel wire in a variety of thicknesses, depending on the weight of the hat and its construction. We traced the pattern of a headpiece to make the wire support, again with Mike's expertise. Although the Alice band shape looks easy, it was this group that were more complicated than we expected. It took several fittings and bending sessions to get the ideal shape, before the mount was stitched and secured in place with clear nylon beading wire. The nylon beading wire knot was briefly heated with a soldering iron to fix it into position. Here we have another example of this type of mount with wire fittings in progress. There were also a number of particularly tricky hats which required a more individual approach. The first example shows an excessively heavy Comme des Garçons crown balanced atop of a turban made out of a folded Union Jack t-shirt. The t-shirt arrived flat and had to be converted into a turban using reference images in the studio. This was arranged in place around the fosse shape mount. The crown was then stitched through the turban to the fosse shape with nylon beading wire. A netted beaded cup, rather like a swimming hat, required a crossbar grid system of wiring to hold it in shape while appearing invisible. Another example is a gold Schiaparelli winged cat mask that sat onto a custom cut mount with wire hooks protruding from the metal washer to support the weight of the hat, as it was not possible to stitch through it. This was then suspended from the lampshade in the kitchen. A punk-inspired hat was hung from fishing wire, which had to be carefully stitched through the hat to the fosse-shape mount below. Buttons were used underneath to anchor the wire through the mount. And one of the final hats that had to be mounted was a catwalk creation for Matty Boven. This was excessively top-heavy, extremely fragile, and not made to last. It was also one of the few hats that required a conservation before mounting. The only way to support it in position was to combine techniques together. Polystyrene, fosse shape, tapes, pins, everything was used to keep it upright. All of the objects were to be on open display around the pavilion. Security was a priority, as it's regularly used for weddings and functions, as well as a popular tourist attraction. Furthermore, the hats were to be exhibited on, over, around, and most importantly, avoiding the historic objects already in situ. Inventive mounting solutions were a must. The majority of stands consisted of a rod set into a heavy metal powder-coated base, cantilevered over the historic furniture where necessary. Other designs included a flocked chess set, color-matched to the interior of the banqueting room gallery, and the Perspex treble clef, inspired by historic Chinese hat stand. There were also 2 gold 3D printed busts of Stephen Jones and 2 of King George IV. While we were previously aware that there is a wide range of creative expertise available within New England House, it is quite rare that so many of us worked together on the delivery of a single project. Almost everything produced for the exhibition, from printed material to metalwork, came from New England House community, or within a half-mile radius of the building. Not only we had the benefit of face-to-face communication, but it meant that nothing was traveling very far, saving both time and money, and making good environmental sense too. The installation itself was not without its challenges. Hats had to be installed before and after opening times, and we also ended up working on public view, adding an extra element of stress to the proceedings. While the majority of hats came from the Stephen Jones archive, there were also a substantial number arriving from individual donors and overseas institutions at the last minute. Every project is different and comes with its own set of challenges. As textile conservators, we had to be ever so resourceful and come up with creative solutions tailored to the situations. It's never one-size-fits-all approach. The Stephen Jones project highlighted the benefit of and need for local networks of professional conservators, mount makers, and specialist craftspeople, offering a wider range of external services to museums beyond the limitation of one discipline. This is something we hope to develop further in the future. Thank you very much. I would really like to thank International Mount Makers Forum for the opportunity to present you this amazing project.
Thank you, Jamie and Ania. That was an incredible presentation, and what an extreme undertaking. Let's start our Q&A portion now. So if you attendees have any questions, please go ahead and enter them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Today, our Q&A facilitator is Sam Hamilton. So Sam will be asking questions of Jamie and Ania, who are here with us today.
Hi, Jamie and Ania. That was a fantastic presentation. Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
What a project. Amazing. I thought I might start off with the questions with one of my own, and I was just really interested to know from both of you, what was your favourite hat? Because there was just so many and incredible ones. I'm wondering if you had a favourite one each, or perhaps there was a few. And then why was it your favourite, and what was the mount that sort of went with it? You know, was it a challenge or was it an opportunity? I'd love to just hear your thoughts about that.
Well, I think I would have to go with one of the last hats we showed was Matty Boven. It was called The Cook. It was made for catwalk, so it wasn't really made to last. It was one of the hats that needed some conservation, so we had quite near collaboration with the designer, Stephen Jones, and he gave us the go-ahead to repair a few little bits. And it was just a challenge because it was so top-heavy, and it maybe wasn't shown at the picture very well, but it's just a scarf, and then it has a little bit of wiring, and then all the kitchen utensils on top of it, floating. So we really had to I made 1 month and it wasn't working. I've added, it wasn't working. So I really had to be very, very creative with the coming up with the solution. And that was the hat that came to the studio probably less than a week from the opening. So it was basically mounted 2 days before the opening.
Wow.
I think, like Ania, I liked the catwalk ones, which were really exciting and kind of experimental and pieces of contemporary art in their own right. And I think for me, the Schiaparelli mask, gold mask, was just fantastic. And we both opened the box and were amazed by it. And then the technical challenges of trying to support it and hang it as well were kind of a really interesting challenge.
Amazing, thank you. I've got some questions here from our attendees. So the first one is from Kevin, and he's saying 1.5 hours per hat, exclamation mark. Did you manage to keep to that, or was there an overrun?
There was an overrun, which I think we took the brunt of, but yeah.
I think most of the time, yes. I think it was probably less than 2 hours per hat, because like physically there wasn't more time, because the exhibition was opening on the 7th of February, and with Christmas and New Year's we started work probably in the first week of January, so we had 30 days. So yes, there was long days, but it was still under probably 2 hours per hat.
I think what took the really a lot of time was kind of coordinating with Mike and working with him on the different parts and how they would fit together.
Yeah, wow. Hats off to you, literally. There's a next question here from Jennifer, and she's saying, how did you keep all those hats and mounts organised in the studio while you were working so quickly?
Lists, a lot of spreadsheets and boxes, and we lucky that our studio is quite big, so we just kept them on different tables, and we had all the boxes were labeled, we knew what's inside, and yeah, we were just trying to remember and we were just taking stuff off the lists.
Yeah. Incredible. So we've got a question here. Now, I think Karen might have missed this information, so if you don't mind just talking about this again, but she's saying, can you talk about that exhibition space? She's saying, you know, was it a historic house or period rooms in a museum? So if you could just go over that a little bit more, because then there's actually a follow-up question that's talking about the visitors, and obviously because things are on open display, you know, how were people interacting in that space? So it'd be great if you can sort of just holistically speak about the space and the visitor experience.
So Brighton Pavilion is a historic palace, and it was built in the 1780s, but then it had kind of a number of different incarnations over that. So most of the work, the interior work, was done in the 19th century. So yes, it really is a kind of a real mixture of styles, pool of styles.
And about the visitors, everything is robed, so it was on the open display, but the visitors couldn't touch it or interact in any shape or form, and all the hats were secured to the stand with a little grab screw. I think we didn't talk about this, but each hat was then, the washer was kind of screwed to the metal stand, so yeah, there was no chance of kind of taking it off the mount or anything like that.
They also have they have quite a big invigilation team as well, so there are people there in every room all the time, kind of keeping an eye out.
And there's a lot of historical objects on open displays throughout the rooms, so security is very good there.
Great. And there's another question here around dust. People are, you know, also interested in, you know, how did you protect the hats from dust, and did you have to clean the hats during the exhibition period?
We are freelance textile conservators, so we were brought in to install the exhibition and help, well, and do the mounting. So we were not responsible for the cleans. So we don't really know how they, how often they were cleaned and how fast the dust was building up. When we were deinstalling, before they were going back to Stephen Jones Archive, we gave them a proper clean and packed them to be sent away. So this is how it was.
Yeah, and so when you, sorry, go.
They do have a conservation team at the pavilion as well. So yeah, I think they were involved in housekeeping.
Thank you. And I guess to that, like when you were doing that final clean, do you feel like there was a bit of a dust build-up, or do you think it was quite reasonable for the period of display?
I think it was reasonable for the time of the display, and they have a lot of visitors, so there was some dust, but it was really really okay. Yeah,
great, thank you. Karen here is also asking, and she might have missed this again, but she was asking about were the hats on loan or from your collection. So she's obviously just missed that bit of information. If you could just reiterate that again, that would be brilliant.
So the majority were from the Stephen Jones Archive, and then a number were on loan from individual donors, mainly the celebrity hats, I think, which came on loan.
And some designers.
Yeah.
So some, because he collaborates with a lot of fashion houses, some of the hats came from their archives.
Thank you. Vincent has a question here, and he's saying, was there restoration involved in consolidating the structure of the cantilevered parts of the hats, or did the mounts also have to support all the dangly bits?
So the base of the mounts were weighted to kind of take the main weight of the hat, and then the portion of the mount that went inside the hat was built as best we could with the time available to support as much of the hat as possible, but they had to be invisible. So, you know, that was a challenge.
And I think Mike, who made the metal stands, he weighted the heaviest hat, and so he knew what was the range, and they were, except of one that was made for the 2012 Olympics in London, they were all made for people, so they weren't really very heavy because they were made to be worn. So they were still probably relatively light.
Thank you. And I'll just ask one more question because we're running out of time. There's one here, it's so exciting to see the new black foss shape being used. Did you find that the thickness available in black was suitable and got rigid enough? And was there any troubleshooting with the foss shape?
We actually found it was really great to work with, I think.
We loved it.
And ideal for hats, which tend to be, well, the ones we were working with the foss shape on were quite light. So it was an ideal material for that.
Okay. Actually, we might just squeeze another one. Oh, Jessie, what do you think? Should we wrap it up? One more minute. Okay. Let's there's a great one here. You mentioned that some hats required reshaping prior to mounting. Were these hats then transported to the exhibit on their mount, or were they reshaped again?
All the hats were transported to the pavilion on the mounts. So we did kind of pre-installation, if it makes sense, in the studio. So we made the mount and then we kind of put it inside of the hat or stitch it on. So then we didn't, so they kind of belonged together because there was such a big number of them. We couldn't kind of separate the hat and the mount because we wouldn't just know what's where. So they were all transported to the pavilion with the mount inside of the hat.
But without their stands and bases, so then they were just applied when we got there.
So they were kind
of, that's another challenge.
For them to the museum, they were put on the metal stand and screwed on. So that was the installation.
Wow. Thank you both so much and for answering these questions, and a great presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Jessie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So apologies if we didn't get to your question, but our presenters' contact information is in the chat now. So you're welcome to reach out to them if you have any additional questions, or join us for our after party this evening, and feel free to ask more questions then.